Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another episode. I'm Zaid, and on the other mic is my wife and co-host Hiba.
Assalamu alaikum.
So today we're honored to have a special guest, Sister Kamela Salimi. She has a unique background as both a registered psychotherapist and certified trauma therapist with a specialization in relational trauma. To further her training, she also obtained a diploma in Islamic psychology. She fuses Western psychology with Islamic psychology. Her experience ranges from individuals to couples to families. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
No problem. Glad to be here.
So in your line of work, you deal with a lot of conflict management and communication issues, correct?
Yes.
Fair to say?
Yeah.
So when people think of course, in our line of work, we focus primarily on getting people ready for marriage, whether it's assessing compatibility, finding a compatible spouse. And naturally, the things that people start thinking about are red flags or what questions should I ask. But conflicts are usually one of the last things that come to mind.
Yeah.
And even when we do think about conflicts, it's always in the context of, well, you guys will just figure it out. Don't worry about it. So how often do you see marriages falling apart because of poor conflict management?
Yeah, that's a bit of a loaded question. When I was reflecting on kind of how to answer this, it's like a whole can of worms that I could open. But to briefly answer it, I would say in therapy sessions, the most common issue that I deal with in couples is conflict management. So it's there, it's common, even if it's not talked about. And are you guys familiar with something called the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse?
Yeah, the Gottman.
Yes, yeah. So
Yeah.
You'll notice I'll quote Gottman a lot because he's in the US, he's known as the father of marriage therapy. So
yeah,
he has these
So
things.
one of them is stonewalling, right?
Yes.
If I remember correctly. Yeah.
Mashallah, you guys don't need me here. Yes,
No,
stonewalling is one of them. He has this cool thing called Love Lab, where he brings in couples and he watches how they interact. And from there, he kind of can guess the outcome of the relationship. Now, obviously, relationships are not that black and white, but he's pretty confident based on his studies that the way couples fight, he says he can guess with 80% certainty if a relationship ends or not. And so his research shows that there's 4 things that lead to conflict when conflict is not being managed, that it can lead to 4 things. So stonewalling is one of them. Defensive is one, and that's often coupled with criticism. So often we're criticized, and then the person that responds is defensive. So defensive, criticism, contempt, and then stonewalling, State, the one that you mentioned. And that over time basically kills connection. And so relationships or marriages might end because 2 people decide to go their separate ways, or they might still be together and there's no connection, right? Yeah.
Okay, so 2 follow-up questions. First, if you can elaborate about the difference between conflict resolution and conflict management, and the second one is if you can elaborate on each one of these 4 factors.
The 4, like the contempt, criticism, and defensiveness.
Yeah. Like how do they manifest?
Yes, yeah, they manifest when when we have issues and we talk about it, and we're not resolving anything. Resolving doesn't have to mean we have a perfect solution where both people are happy. In fact, I think Gottman is one of the people that says there's differences in marriage and lots of differences, and we might never get to a point of resolution. It's just learning how to live with the differences. So if, let me just give the example of, this kind of happens with men is, if they come home from work, they kind of put their socks on the floor, and the wife is like, please remove your socks, please clean the counter. And it happens. Okay.
I know someone who does that.
Okay.
I'm not going to say who.
So day after day, if you're like, please pick up your socks, and if it's not being resolved, what Gottman says is that eventually it leads to the 4 horsemen. And when the 4 horsemen is there, that's when it's basically signifying the day of judgment or the end of the relationship, or the end of connection, right? So it's pretty scary. And my intention is not to overwhelm people, but just to be good about being vigilant. And when I do couples counseling, we go through the 4 horsemen, and I ask, what are you seeing? And what are each of you doing to contribute to the 4 horsemen, right? Because it's easy to be like, oh my God, like he's very critical of me. Okay, what role are you playing in that dynamic? Yeah, so that's a little bit about the 4 horsemen. And then there's ways of getting around the horsemen. I can answer that now if you want more details, or
Sure.
But does it answer the 2 questions you asked about resolution and management? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, do that, please.
Sure. So to kind of build some hope so that it's not kind of end of the world thinking, he has those 4 horsemen, but then he has something called the antidote to the 4 horsemen, right? So he says, if you are, contempt is one of them. So contempt is more, I would say, of the 4 horsemen, that's the most dangerous one. And what it looks like is disrespect. It looks like this feeling of superiority, and what it communicates is like disgust, when you're like really looking down on the person. And contempt, we don't start with contempt towards another. It builds up, like I said, over time. So the antidote to contempt is you build a culture of appreciation. So you start to focus on the positive qualities of your partner, and you pay attention to those, and you name it as well. So that's the antidote, is building a culture of appreciation. And contempt is not something you say, it's also in your body language. So one of the most common examples is, when they're speaking, you're kind of rolling your eyes, you're kind of checking out when they're trying to be vulnerable, things like that. So that's the contempt. For criticism, the opposite of it is soft startup. So Gottman in his lab, he looks at how a conflict begins, and he can guess based on how it begins to how it's going to end, right? So just a gentle startup. And that's where you hear the very common, like, use I language, don't say you never pick up your socks. It's, I feel like I don't matter. This is a very generic example. Obviously, when conflict is happening, it's much more complicated. But you try to make it about you and your feeling, as opposed to criticizing the person and generalizing about their character and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that was contempt. We went through stonewalling. Stonewalling we didn't go through. That's the other one. Stonewalling, it's pretty self-explanatory what it is. What practically it would look like is one person just kind of withdraws. And it can happen for hours. Sometimes it can happen for days. I've worked with couples where it can happen for weeks, where one person is just really, really upset. And so they withdraw, they shut down, they disconnect. Often what happens when we're stonewalling is the conflict feels so much, like we're just feeling overwhelmed. And so the only way we can cope in that moment is to step away. There's nothing wrong with that. I think stonewalling gets like a bad reputation when we choose to step away and disconnect. And when I do couples counseling, we always talk about how can we safely disconnect and disengage, where the other person knows I'm not going anywhere. I still love you, but I need my space. So the opposite of stonewalling is you have to learn how to self-regulate, so that when you're in the middle of conflict and you're really, really uncomfortable and all you want to do is run away and hide, what we call is you have to self-soothe. So in the same way that you comfort and calm down a baby, you have to learn how to self-soothe, where you're like, I'm okay, we're good. And know your limit. Like, you're going to reach a point where you're going to, that coping method is going to kick in and you're going to run, but try to stay present, maybe for the conflict that's not as overwhelming. So that's a little bit about that. What would you imagine the opposite of defensiveness is?
That's a good question.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, so it's taking responsibility.
Oh,
right.
Oh, okay.
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 I think it's still too early for us.
Yeah. So it's not easy to do, but trying to hear what the other person has to say, to be like where there might be some truth in the thing that's impacting them. So it's not easy to do in that moment. That's why a lot of, I think, couples work is learning to sit in that discomfort, and trying to stay in the fact that we're a team, as opposed to it's you versus me. And that's what can happen when we have conflict that's ongoing, that's not resolved. It becomes me versus you, and as opposed to we're here in this together, we're struggling and we don't know how to resolve it, which that creates more of a culture of empathy, and giving each other benefit of the doubt. Yeah. So what I found is, I haven't found, but what research has found is that criticism and defensiveness kind of go hand in hand. So usually you'll have one partner that's a bit more critical. Over time, the other person becomes very defensive. And then when that's not resolved, it can lead to more stonewalling and then eventually contempt, which is once contempt is there, then that's when, it's serious. Like we need to step in and do some surgery. It's no longer, let's just be patient with each other and talk it out.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of, just before you ask your question, Zaid, because I have a feeling I know what you're going to ask. But yesterday I was having coffee with a friend and we were talking about like differences between men and women and criticism in particular. So I was telling her that like prior to getting married or in the first stages of marriage, like I didn't know that men and women handle criticism differently. Like I would criticize a lot of things thinking that like this is how we improve, this is how we grow, and I didn't know that men take criticism sometimes as undermining. So is there truth to that, or is this just an individual experience?
That men take it as what was the word?
Undermining.
Yeah. So I kind of stay away from being like, this is a men thing, this is a women thing, and this is how men receive. I found when I've done couples counseling that every couple is unique. In EFT, which is emotion focused therapy model, my job becomes whichever couple I'm seeing that I'm mapping out their unique dynamic. So there might be a men-women thing. I don't have knowledge of that. For me, what it looks like is for each people to focus on their own relationship. And the phrase we use in sessions is, how are things received? How do things land? When I said, what was my intent? What did I mean when I say that? And how did it land? And so you can say something that from your background, from your life story, from your family of origin, it might be really kind and really helpful. And then the other person, the way it lands for them, it's like, that was really mean what you just said, right? And that can happen either way, from men to women, women to men. So a lot of, especially in the first few years of the relationship, it's learning about each other, learning about each other's history, learning about each other's communication styles, right? So I'll give an example. I come from a family where we're non-confrontational. We don't raise our voices. And so for me, I know that when someone speaks to me in a raised voice or like a certain kind of tone, I have a reaction. Right? Even if the other person is very well-meaning, it's just how I react. So it's about, a lot of it comes down to self-awareness, and then building awareness of your partner. And then in time, inshallah, years from now, you could be like, yep, you could look back and be like, I could see why that didn't land very well. Right. And that's tied directly to communication, strengthening and building communication skills, which is linked to conflict management. Right, the two go hand in hand. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So to bring it back to singlehood.
Yes.
I wanted to actually go back to the 4 Horsemen and ask you, how do these things, or is there a way for people to be self-aware and look out for these things prior to marriage, so that people can get mentally ready for marriage, in a sense?
Yes, you can do your homework. You can take time getting to know the person. I guess there's two ways of answering this. Part of it is doing your homework, where you get to know the person, you ask questions. Part of your questions can be like, how do you handle conflict? And sometimes people know how to give the right answer. It could be also when conflict comes up in the getting to know phase. So the earlier question was saying that, we don't really ask about conflict management. Whether we ask about it or not, it shows up when we're getting to know. So as bumps come up, how does the other person handle it? How is their emotional reactivity? What is their dynamic with their family like? And I know not everyone's family represents kind of how they do things, but what are their boundaries like? Things like that. So you kind of do your homework in that aspect. And to do that, by the way, requires you doing your own work, because you need to have the awareness to pick up on those things. So I always say a lot of preparing for marriage and preparing for having children is you do the work on yourself. You build that self-awareness. And then eventually, I think in any situation when you're getting to know someone, at the end of the day, it's a leap of faith that you take when you decide, okay, this is the person that I'm going to kind of share my life with. We see how it goes. You pray istikhara, you make dua, you hope for the best. And then marriage comes after. And to answer your question, I think sometimes when it comes to conflict, our approach becomes, okay, how do we avoid conflict? Like, how can we have our list checked so that we don't have to get to that place, right? And I would say that that's more of a problematic question, because it's, I think I have more of an issue with the problem because it looks at conflict more from a place of like fear, as opposed to it's a normal thing. It's going to happen. No matter how much you love each other, love is not enough to avoid conflict. Knowing that it's going to happen, knowing that there's days we're gonna feel really connected and other days we might not like each other that much. How do we move forward? Right? So then it becomes about, we can talk more about it later on. I'm kind of going to a different topic, which is instead of how do we create the system where we have the I's dotted and the T's crossed so we don't get to that place. How do we stay vigilant and have a really good repair process so that when we do have fights, when we feel disconnected, we know what to do as a team to kind of move through that. Yeah.
It's a good point you brought up because, some couples brag about never fighting and we just have the perfect marriage and everything's just hunky-dory. And that's sometimes seen as the ideal. But no conflict, I'm assuming, is a bad thing, right? It could be a red flag in disguise, correct?
Yeah. There might be some miraculous couple where they don't have fights. So I don't want to just be like, no, conflict is everywhere. Realistically, from having been married and having working with clients, yes, conflict exists. But again, I think it's the issue with that thing of like, oh, we never have conflict is it's how you're viewing conflict, is you're seeing conflict as a bad thing. And maybe there's an assumption that if we have conflict, that it erodes the connection. But in fact, like when you have conflict, it means you care for the relationship, you care for one another. And that process of going through it together, feeling disconnected, repairing, can actually increase connection. So a lack of conflict is not necessarily a great thing for the connection. Right? Right. And I think that's where people would be like, yeah, we're good. We don't have conflict. That might not be a bad thing. That might not be a good thing, even if you don't have conflict.
Because things might be building up in the background, right?
Yes. So in the cases where you need to have conflict, but you're avoiding conflict, yeah, that's the case. So I've dealt with couples where it's like, and even in my own life, like depending on the day that I'm going through, where I just don't have the capacity or the energy, or the other person might not, to be like, let's have a conversation about this. Let's talk about this. I'm just going to be like, I'm fine. I'm good. Right. But if I do that long term, that's where we move towards the 4 horsemen. Yeah.
Okay. Now, 2 people can have a completely different conflict styles. One could be, like you mentioned before, they need space, they need some time, and the other one could be like, no, we need to figure this out immediately and not let it, like, not even go to sleep without resolving this conflict. So when you have 2 people with different styles like this, how do you handle this?
Yeah. One thing I always have to remind couples is difference is not a bad thing. So sometimes couples will come in and be like, I'm really scared. We're so different. Like, are things going to end between us? And they'll list a list of things where they're different. So I just want to kind of reframe, to challenge the framing of the question. Difference is not a bad thing. Okay. It's just, again, it's going back to what we talked about earlier. What is your unique couple map as a couple? And how do we address that? So in EFT, which is a common model for couples, what we would do is, if you 2 were to come in and see me, I would say, okay, let's name a conflict that you recently had. How did it start? How did each of you react? What happened in the end? Were you able to resolve? Did you talk about it the next day? What was going on? And so with the emotion-focused therapy model, they actually have kind of templates of common dynamics that they found with couples. So one of the most common ones that I see like 80% of the time, and that I even kind of personally experience in my own marriage, is you have the pursuer withdrawer. And so during conflict, you have one person that's pursuing, that's like, no, like we have to resolve this right now. We can't go to bed angry. Let's talk about it. And they're just, they're restless and they're not okay. And then the other person is the withdrawer, and then they kind of check out. And I would say, again, like some people ask, oh, do men fit more in one? Do women fit more in the other? I've seen a bit more where men are withdrawing, women tend to be pursuers. But even in my own marriage, I can be the withdrawer a little bit sometimes too. So I don't want to generalize. And then you have in cases where if someone's pursued for, let's say, years of, let's solve this, and they just get tired, then you have the burnt out pursuer.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah, you have the burnt out pursuer who's like, yep, I don't care. Right. So then it might lead the other person to be like, well, wait, let's talk. What just happened? Right. So, so what happens is you want to figure out your unique map.
Okay.
It's not always as simple as you fit in this box, I fit in this box. But how do we then as a couple address these differences? And if you fit in the pursuer withdrawer category, there's a really cool activity called timeout, where let's say you get to, you're trying to figure something out. It's not being resolved. You're both getting really frustrated. The person who's the withdrawer is like, I need some space. Then the pursuer has to respect that. And so we call timeout. Timeout can be 1 hour. It can be half a day. Sometimes it can be 24 hours. The timeout happens with the promise that the person who's withdrawing comes back, and then we have a discussion. Because what happens with the withdrawer is they kind of leave, and then we never actually talk about what happened. And that's where the pursuer is now, it's not fair for the pursuer because they're like, when are we going to talk about what happened? Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. I like this technique because instead of thinking the withdrawer is just gone indefinitely and the other person is feeling anxious, okay, what's going to happen? Are we going to talk about it? Like this sets like an expectation. I like that.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add is that sometimes when we look at relationships or when we're following social media, we can get into the pattern of, oh, I have like an avoidant husband, or I married a narcissist. And sometimes that is
I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Start labeling each other.
Yes. So I don't want to dismiss that does happen. Often from my experience, what I've seen is you have two people that are trying to make this relationship work that aren't always doing it the right way. That's also bringing in their own family history of trauma. So their own history, family dynamics, things like that. So we're all coping in different ways when we're activated. And so, and sometimes those ways that we're coping is not productive to the relationship. So it's just about, okay, what are my coping strategies? How is it productive to the relationship? Does it feed connection or disconnection? And how do we each need to hold each other so that we're coping in a better way that promotes connection, as opposed to, I'm super activated, I'm going to do what I need to do to feel relief, whether it's I have to pursue you till we resolve this, or I'm going to check out.
Okay, well, a single Muslim listening to this might feel marriage is a lot of work. Like, is it really worth it?
Yeah. Is that your question for me?
I don't know if that's a question or just an observation.
I think what she's trying to ask is, how do we relieve the single guy or girl?
There you go.
Yes.
And just put them at ease and give them tools to get them ready.
Well, like it always comes back to having faith in Allah, making lots of dua. Everything that happens is good for us. So I'm not meaning to scare people away. We also shouldn't take marriage lightly. Like it's not a joke. In Islam, it's considered an act of worship, right? So what I would say is it takes effort, it takes intentionality. And so that's why you have to do your homework and you have to take your time. Sometimes, when we watch like Bollywood movies, right? We kind of expect that it's going to be butterflies, and it's like we're focusing more on the chemistry side of things. And so we have to realize that we're two human beings trying to come together and build a life eventually, inshallah, if Allah plans, raising kids, all of those things. So I don't think it's a bad thing to be scared a little bit if that's going to help us become more intentional. But also, and I'm sure you two can name a few things that, marriage is a blessing that, even with my husband, for example, like the fact that we pray together, that to me is incredible. The fact that I have someone now that I can go to and talk about my feelings, right? So I guess because we're focusing on conflict management, we're not focusing on, the amazing parts of it. This is also just as important though. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to add to that, we sometimes forget that the Prophet ﷺ had marital disputes, right?
Yes.
Like even his marriage wasn't perfect in that regard, because he had wives that had different personalities.
Yes.
So, given your background in Islamic psychology, what does conflict resolution look like in an Islamic context?
Yeah. So it's a very big question. Because I think to answer how does Islam look at conflict resolution, we have to look at Islam as a lifestyle, right? And so, what is the difference between Islamic psychology? How does Western psychology view things? And so, I'm going to try to kind of keep my thoughts clear. One of the main differences, without going too much into philosophy and because I know we're focusing on conflict management. One of the biggest differences between Islamic psychology and Western psychology is that Western psychology looks at freedom of the self. This is what I learned when I studied Islamic psychology. Mm-hmm. Islamic psychology looks at freedom from the self. Yeah, I'm gonna give you a sec for that to settle.
Yeah.
There's a difference between the two, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. How do you think that difference would impact marriage, or how we approach marriage? Like, if you were to take a guess.
Like Western psychology. Zaid, can I take a guess?
Yeah, I have an idea. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Western psychology is more like self-centered, how to not get the upper hand, but how it's all about you. But Islamic psychology is how to free yourself from your ego, from your desires, from your everything that's negative. Is that close?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's part of it. So you're in the right direction. Yeah.
Okay, Zaid, what do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Like, one sounds more narcissistic, and the other one sounds more selfless.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's not meant to put down Western psychology, or if anyone listens to this, they're like, "Oh, I'm not seeing a therapist." It's just, because they're putting these kinds of values. No, there's nothing wrong with looking out for yourself, and taking care of yourself and self-preservation. But there is a difference, I think, in kind of, and I'm sure you see it on social media and in the culture that we're moving towards, where it's freedom of the self looks at me, my boundaries, my lines, what I need to feel happy, where freedom from the self, understands that I'm an imperfect human being. Yes, I have certain strengths, and I have weaknesses, qualities about myself that I need to work on, that I need to improve on. And so Islamically, our life should be this constant process of working on our heart, strengthening those weaknesses. And a marriage is a beautiful tool for that, because you can help each other with that. There's a positive twist there. So I think one part of marriage is it requires a lot of selflessness. Sometimes it requires being patient with the other person, even if you feel like, yep, I've been wronged. Obviously, I want to make it clear that in cases of abuse and stuff like that, that's a whole different discussion. But when you have two people that are trying, they're not always figuring it out. Sometimes they're at a standstill. There's disconnection. Part of the patience, there's values within Islam that can help us get through that, which is forgiveness, compassion, patience towards one another. And the beautiful thing is, in Islamic psychology, it's not just me and you working together. It's me and you anchored in this faith called Islam, and this Lord that we both believe in. Hopefully we both prayed istikhara, before making that decision to be with each other. So so we move from me versus you to us, to now us and Allah, and we are accountable to Him, and we have to answer to Him. So how do I do right by my spouse? So that's one other thing, making lots of dua. I think we have access to that. One thing that's really interesting that never came up in my training in Western psychology is shaitan, right? So one of the things we know shaitan loves is when he creates disconnection between spouses.
Yeah,
right. So we seek protection from shaitan, like we should be doing that daily. I don't know, even more than daily if you want. But there's that piece. And then I wanted to bring some examples to just humanize the Prophet, peace be upon him, and then also Aisha radiallahu anha. And I think, Zaid, you mentioned an example where you said in the question that you asked, you said that the Sahabas, I think, showed emotions. I don't know if I remember that correctly.
I was talking about how the wives had different
Oh,
personalities.
okay.
Yes.
So I don't know too much
Yeah.
about the wives and their personalities, but I'll focus on Aisha radiallahu anha. And there's one story that I heard that always sticks with me. So, and I don't know if you guys have heard of it. So the story is that it was her time with Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and I think one of the other wives sent over some food, and so she kind of okay.
No, but do tell it, please.
Yeah, there's a whole surah dedicated to it, but please go ahead.
So I think she got annoyed because it was her time with him, and so even just another wife bringing over food annoyed her, and she threw the plate over and the plate broke. Right? Yeah. Like imagine that.
Wow. And the Prophet ﷺ had guests, so she did this in front of guests as well.
I didn't know that part.
And she was also she was also known to be a bad cook, so she took it as like a personal attack.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's many ways to this. Yeah, there's many ways that we can. But look at that, like it's Aisha radiallahu anha, like the woman that recorded so many hadiths that we now use. She threw a plate, it broke. She was jealous. Yeah. The term we would use, the clinical term, is she was dysregulated, right? So she's a human being with emotions, and she wasn't saying, "Oh, I feel upset right now," right? Like where sometimes we expect each other to do that in the heat of the moment. That you should still be able to talk to me properly. No, her emotions took over. So that's one example I wanted to use. Another one is not really related to marriage, but the Prophet, peace be upon him, when his son died. When his son Ibrahim alayhi salam died, he started to cry, and so the Sahabas were like, one of the Sahabas said, "Oh Prophet, even you cry?" And I wrote down what he said. He said, "The eyes shed tears and the heart feels sorrow, but we do not say except that which pleases Allah. Indeed, we are saddened by your departure, O Ibrahim." So I use that as an example, even in the individual sessions, to say that, like he literally says, the eyes shed tears and the heart feels sorrow. So it's like the eyes are doing their own thing, right? Yeah. That's in somatic therapy, which is we look at the body and how the body responds and reacts. Like this is emotions, and it's okay. And there's tears, and it's not a sign of, ungratefulness, but that these things happen and we have reactions. And then the last example that always comes to mind, that will help answer the question that you had asked, Zaid, was when Aisha radiallahu anha asked the Prophet, peace be upon him, about his love for her, and he said it's like a strong binding knot. I don't know if you've heard of that. That's a common one that gets, and then every once in a while she would ask him, how is the knot? And he would say, as strong as the first day I don't know if it's as the first day you asked or the first day they were together. That part I'm not sure about. So this is an example of two people that are attuned, that there's clearly between them closeness, affection, respect, attachment. And this is the example we're supposed to, because he is the best example that we're supposed to work towards, that we're supposed to, and it's an inside kind of thing. I was going to say inside joke. It's not a joke, but it's this inside thing that they have that connects them together.
The thing that stands out to me in the example of the second example you gave when the Prophet ﷺ's son passed away, is that even in the heat of the moment, he was setting boundaries, right? That even then you don't say things that displease Allah, right? And I believe there's also a verse in the Quran about that no matter how bad things get, there are still boundaries that you don't cross.
I wish. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I respond to that, or is it a different point?
No, please go ahead.
Yes. So our hope is that, and this is the best example that we're trying to follow, and we're trying to emulate that. And our hope is that even in moments of intense dysregulation, that we have some level of level-headedness where our emotions show up, and we try not to cross those certain lines. What I would say is that there will be times, because he is the best example, we're supposed to follow him, we are not him, is that there might be times when you might not name that boundary, or you might say or do something depending on what the trigger was or what happened that led to the conflict, that boundaries might be crossed. You might forget the boundary, and that's where it's okay. It's not the end of the world. We're not focusing on not making mistakes. We're focusing on the repair process. And so once, like if we have a really And John Gottman talks about that. He says that from his research on the love labs, the happiest couples sometimes have screaming matches.
Really?
Right? That's hard to believe, right?
Yeah.
They have screaming matches, but they're happy, connected couples. So when that happens, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. Both of we need to breathe, take some space, and then we're going to come back and repair, right? The word for that, what I would say with clients, is security. That as couples, we need to work towards building security in our marriage, right? If we have conflict, we have screaming matches. I'm not trying to normalize screaming matches. I'm saying it will happen and it's okay. It's not the end of the world. But the idea is, as you get better at handling conflict, as you get better at your repair process, you build security. Security means, we're going to have good days, we're going to have bad days, but I know you're here for me and I'm here for you. When a marriage lacks security, it's more like, oh crap, we just had a fight. Is he going to leave me? Or do I need to run away? Do I need to leave? Did I make the wrong decision? And by the way, in the first few years of marriage, it takes time to build security. So those are normal thoughts that can happen, because security doesn't happen overnight. Yeah.
Interesting. So 2 questions. I'll just start with the one, not to confuse you. How can we train ourselves not to bring old conflicts and remember 3 years, 15 days ago you said this, or remember when you said this to me, and sometimes it happens unintentionally, and even if we were able to resolve the conflict, sometimes some things just remain. So how can we get rid of this? Free ourselves from the baggage.
It's usually women that get that reputation that you brought up something 3 years ago.
I didn't say it. So the hope is, we don't want to get to a point where things have built up for years and years and years, right? This is why we need so much education for couples when it's premarital, so that they have tools and resources to do their homework when they're choosing a spouse. And that once you're married, it's okay. It's still not the end of the world. How do we get more tools so that we're really good at handling conflict management? So what I would say is, don't let it build up over years. Part of it too is, there's 2 pieces to it. Part of it, as you get to know each other, and as you learn about each other. John Gottman says that there's certain differences that you're not going to be able to ever resolve. And so it's about part of it is accepting certain flaws in our partner. And you have to take accountability over that of, I wish he was different in this way, but he's really not. And, do I want to leave, or do I want to make this work? If I'm going to make this work, then I need to maybe stop trying to change this one thing. I guess it depends on the thing as well. You might decide, nope, this is going to drive me crazy. And that's one of the things for researchers that look at relationships from a problem-focused lens, is choose your partner based on the problems that you can't handle, the problems that are going to drive you crazy. So if you're very protective of money and you want to save every penny, and you're very, intentional about where your money goes, and you're talking to someone who's, just doesn't save, doesn't budget, that's probably not the best person for you to get to know further. Right. So that opens up a whole other question of differences that we need to look out for. So religion is one thing we need to assess for. Money is another one. Children, do they want to have children? Do they not? If you want to have kids and they don't marry this person thinking you're going to convince them to have children, because it's going to build resentment, right? What are views about in-laws? How often are we expected to visit them? If issues come up with in-laws, how do we handle it as a couple, right? What are boundaries that are important to you? Is the other person on the same page? Those things, hopefully, ideally, you want to get to know before you make a decision to marry that person. Once you're married and you're dealing with those issues, it's not the end of the world. We still make lots of dua. It happened. It was meant to be, things like that. But then I guess your question kind of asks about that. So acceptance is one piece. If you're already married and you're like, okay, is this something I can accept? That helps with preventing buildup of resentment over time. Right. And then another thing, especially if these things have accumulated over time, is narrative. right? Narrative therapy model is a big model that lots of therapists get trained in. And narrative therapy just looks at life as stories. What are the stories that I say about myself? What are the stories that I've internalized about my partner, my family, the stranger down the street? And so you have to be intentional about looking at your marriage and what are the stories that you're telling yourself about the other person? And is it leading to connection or disconnection? And if we bring within our faith kind of paradigm, we believe in shaitan. How does shaitan kind of affect the framing that happens during conflict about how we see our partner? And so in that case, we need to reframe, right? Am I moving in a place where I've internalized all these stories about my partner that's leading to disconnection? How do we reframe? Sometimes you can't do it on your own. Sometimes you need, couples counseling, things like that. That's where I would start. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and more. Honestly, every time you answer a question, more questions come up.
The topic is so vast that it's hard to answer with one or two.
Zaid, I hope I'm not hoarding the conversation.
No, go ahead.
Well, God, remember I said I have 2 questions. Now they became 3. Okay, so
oh my God.
Okay, I think that a lot of times, like, of course, we're all Muslims. We know what we believe in, what we don't believe in. But like in the heat of the moment, a lot of these things become more like hypothetical or ideal. Like even like you said, shaitan. Like we realize shaitan is an entity, and like you said, like there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, if someone's angry and they're standing, sit down. If they're sitting down, you're angry, then lay down, because like shaitan is just fueling it. But when we're in the heat of the moment, all these things become like, I don't know, not practical anymore. How can we actually internalize this and bring it into our like conflicts?
Yes. So I don't know how much to answer that from an Islamic lens, but from my training as a trauma therapist, depending on how heated the conflict is getting, research shows that there's a point where when our emotions are to such an intensity, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that focuses on meaning making, problem solving, abstract thinking, reflecting, that goes offline. Wow. Yeah. So that's why when we're at that level, when you tell someone, calm down, be grateful to Allah, when you start lecturing them, that's going over their head, right? In those moments, you can't expect yourself and the other person to stay grounded and logical and respect your boundaries. That is an unrealistic, unfair expectation. Mm-hmm. When we get to that point of intensity, both people should know that we shouldn't be engaging further with each other. We need to step away. Because once you get to a level of intensity, you can problem solve for hours and hours and hours. You're not going to get anywhere. Probably you'll make things worse because your emotions are in the driver's seat. And I've heard from couples, they'll say, yeah, we had a fight, and then for 4 hours that day we talked about it. And I'm like, no, don't do that. So there is such a thing where there's a line when that's crossed, logic kind of goes out the window. And so it's not about how do I stay logical at that point. It's what do I need to do knowing that logic has gone out the window, and we need to step back, decompress, take some time, and then come back and re-engage. The work both of you have to do is about that, building that self-awareness and awareness of one another to say, how do I know I'm moving in that direction? And it can be, let's say for both of you, it could be, I didn't sleep well the night before. I haven't eaten. I haven't been outside. I haven't moved around. I had issues with family that come up. Work was stressful. And so if your cup is empty and you're moving in that direction, and then one of you says or does something that kind of adds to that, and then you explode, building that self-awareness means, how do I know that, I or my partner are moving in that direction? How do we take a step back before we even get there in the first place? Probably on those days when the clinical term for it is when our window is small. On those days when our window is small and we can tell one or both of us is really out of it, probably those are not the best days to be having serious conversations, trying to make big decisions. And so it's up to each person to communicate, hey, I think today I'm not well. And for the other person to respect that and say, okay, let's take a step back. Let's check in with each other again. So it requires a lot of check-in. And those check-ins are what's going to get in the way of the narrative, of the framing. right? So if you tell your partner, hey, today's not a good day, like I'm not doing well, maybe you can take care of dinner, I don't know what it might look like, and your partner knows, then they're like, oh, she's not okay today, and I'm going to remember that, versus, wow, she's being cold to me today, she's ignoring me, she didn't even bother making dinner, right?
Yeah. Subhanallah, I'm just baffled right now, because when you said that there's a part of the brain that stops like functioning normally when you get to that level of like anger, it just reminded me that, subhanallah, like in our sharia, when a divorce, like a talaq happens, in that kind of moment, it's not like it doesn't actually, it doesn't happen, like subhanallah, because like you said, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, like you're at a stage where you can't think clearly.
Yes,
that's amazing.
And I want to add, because now your point is making me add more, so I think we're going to be here for a few hours. When I studied Islamic psychology, Islam in itself is a form of healing. Islam in itself is a form of therapy. And the way that Allah has ordained for us to go make wudu, to pray 5 times a day when we can, those are all meant to kind of serve as release, right? As moments when we step back, when we breathe, as opposed to just kind of running and doing the rat race of life, right? I was in a therapy training where, for the DBT model, where they were saying, yeah, when you're really heated and you want to yell, go to the washroom and wash your face with cold water. And they said, put cold water from your hands all the way to your elbows. And I was sitting there and I was like, I was like, wait, this sounds like wudu. Right? So subhanAllah, like, I don't need to go in and analyze every act of worship in Islam and say, how does it fit with what Western therapy is telling us? No, Islam doesn't need that. Islam in itself is a form of therapy. So if we make dua, we're intentional about fulfilling those acts of worship, it's going to help us in our relationships with ourselves, in our marriage, and in our ability to regulate ourselves.
Absolutely beautiful. Like the shaitan itself, we know it's made of heat, it's made of fire. So when you go make wudu, it puts off that heat and that fire. And like the Prophet ﷺ used, like, إِذَا فَزَعُهُ أَمْرٌ, if he got anxious about something, he used to run away to prayer. Subhanallah. Like I would really love if even us, Zaid, on a personal level, we start implementing these beautiful practices.
And I just heard from a friend, my husband and I visited his cousins, and we were asking them, because they've been married longer than us, we said, what's your marriage advice? And he said, go to Allah before you go to your husband. And it doesn't mean like, avoid talking to things with your husband, but it means, like, especially in those moments where you're really upset, you're really frustrated with the other person, and you're like, why aren't they hearing me? You go to Allah, you complain, you ask for his help, you name your helplessness, the hurt that you're feeling, you cry if you need to, you let it out, and then you come back and say, let's talk. And so it's kind of like, if you imagine a pressure cooker, you're releasing some of that through, talking to Allah, and then you go back. And of course, Allah, hears your duas, hears your pain, and he intervenes in whatever way he thinks is best. But
beautiful.
And sorry to interrupt, the go to Allah before your husband, that applies in all relationships, not just when you're married. So if you're single and you're looking, go to Allah before you go to your parents, and all those things. Sorry, Zaid.
No, that's fine. One of the few phrases I know in Arabic is "shikaytak li wahid ahad," which means I can translate that.
I complain to Allah about you.
Okay. Wow.
To the one and only.
And imagine if you, instead of doing that, you went to your parents or friends and started complaining, right? Like, what would happen?
Sometimes people just add fuel to the fire.
Speaking of fire and heat,
I think these beautiful practices and practical practices, because someone might look at them and say, these things, like, okay, but give me something practical. But these are practical. I think these practices are like one of the things that single Muslims can start developing and growing before marriage. There's a lot to do before you get married.
I would say build your relationship with Allah, focus on your prayers. Those are all ways that you're learning how to self-regulate, and it's you're working on your heart, and when that happens and you meet someone else and you're building a life with them, it's going to be a lot easier, right? Doesn't mean it's going to be without issues, but Islam is a resource, it's a tool that we can draw from.
Yes, absolutely. Any resources sorry, Zaid?
No, go ahead.
Any resources you can recommend to our single listeners to prepare them? Anything?
So I quoted Gottman a lot. He has lots of, and I think it's his wife too. They do research together. So it's John and Julie Gottman. So I would go to YouTube, look at the love labs. Gary Chapman is another one where 5 love languages, love tank, even learning about attachment is important to figure out, when it comes to conflict. Are you an avoider? Are you more of an anxious person where you're a bit clingy? None of that is bad. It's just what are ways that you need to cope on your own, and what would you need from a partner? And so keeping that in mind when you're getting to know someone. And I would say it comes back to a lot of relational work, I would say, is doing the work on yourself. And the work never stops. Even when you're married, the work continues. But sometimes we get so focused on finding that person that we're not doing the work on ourselves. So do that, strengthen your relationship with Allah, work on being a better Muslim. You don't have to be perfect. Make lots of dua, ask Allah for help. Prayers are really important. Start there, even if you're not doing all 5, but just show up with some effort and sincerity, and make lots of dua. Yeah.
For sure.
Well,
so for single Muslims listening right now who haven't lived with a partner yet, some practical or 3 practical things they can start doing before marriage to get better at conflict.
Yes. So, and I've probably sound like a broken radio. I've said this a few times. Build self-awareness. Work on yourself. Know your strengths. Know your weaknesses. Think about conflict. How do you respond to conflict? Are you someone that withdraws? Are you a pursuer? And look at your current relationships. And yes, there's some relationships that are tricky. Things with family might be complicated. There's no denying of that. But is there room in other friendships to practice, or even within your family, those more kind of practicing those skills, communicating, strengthening emotion regulation, things like that. So you don't need to just build those skills with a partner. You can practice those. How do you set boundaries in your single days, things like that. And then I would say get support if you need. When I was in Cambridge and we were studying, I was studying Islamic psychology, I talked a little bit about the window of tolerance and how sometimes we can get pushed out of our capacity and how much we can handle. And I asked, it was Sheikh Idris Watts. I don't know if he's familiar to you guys.
I've heard the name.
Follow him on Instagram. He's really amazing. He's a trauma therapist, and he studies the Quran. So he kind of brings the two together, which is amazing. Yeah. So I just asked him, I said, okay, so the Western kind of model of the window of capacity, there's a window and we're kind of sometimes within that window, and then things happen in life that pushes us out of our window, where I even named the prefrontal cortex goes offline. Doesn't that mean that Allah is giving us in that moment more than we can handle? And it's a question that I'm still kind of asking, I don't know all the answers to, but he said sometimes when we're out of our window and things feel really hard, it might not be that Allah expects us to carry more weight or carry that burden. Sometimes he expects us to ask for help, and maybe we're just trying too hard to figure it out on our own, and we're just stretching ourselves more than Allah wants us to stretch. So getting support, asking for help, but also doing the same thing when you're married as well, and even asking with a potential partner, if we're struggling on our own, maybe there's conflict that over time it's just getting worse, what would we do at that point? Who would we ask for support? Things like that.
Okay. Do you work with single Muslims or just couples?
Yeah, I do individual and couple.
Okay. And if someone would reach out to you and seek your services, how would they do that?
Yeah, so the practice that I'm part of is called Muslim Women's Wellness. We're supporting Muslim women's wellness, and we also offer relational therapy if that's needed, because that is also helping women in their wellness. So it's called muslimwomenswellness.com.
Yeah. Okay, we will link that, inshallah. So you work exclusively with women?
Yes, it's myself and I have 3 other associates.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, awesome.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Wow, I hope we
Thank
didn't.
You so much.
Yeah, we didn't ask too many. I still have more, but maybe we'll save that for another interview.
No worries.
Jazakumullah khair.
Nice chatting with you both.
Thank you so much, our beautiful listeners. We hope you took some homework to do yourself. Don't wait for marriage to happen and conflict to happen until you start doing the work. There's still a lot to do now, and inshallah, we hope you took some gems with you.
Right,
Salam alaikum.